So welcome to a damp but rapidly drying Estoril. We're here inside the cockpit of the new 750S, so quickly run you through it. Fundamentally, it's a 720S, but as is typical for McLaren, they've gone over it with the finest of combs. The engine, it's up from 710 to 740 horsepower. We've turned up the boost, obviously. Increased cooling. It's got the pistons from the 765LT, and it's actually got a second fuel pump because it now needs it in the most extreme circumstances. We're doing a bit of time on track in the morning, and it's drying out quite nicely. And then after that, we are going to go onto the road, because with the 720S, the magic of that car was the fact that it was actually a pretty good GT car. It had phenomenally pliant ride quality. It was really a car you could spend all day in, and McLaren say they've enhanced that with the 750S, but also made it an even better track car. So we've got a couple of laps of Estoril now. We're on the Pirelli P0 Trofeo Rs. A very, very, very hardcore type of rubber, that. And we're just going to explore what this car is like compared to the 720S, which was always phenomenally fast, but quite locked down normally and a real precision tool. The one thing it needed was possibly a touch more of a sense of humour, not so much that it would spit you off into the wall, but just a little bit more playfulness and adjustability. So here we go. Coming round the final bend here at Estoril. It's a long right-hand sweeper. Coming out in fourth gear. Let's see what this thing's all about. There's the boost. Bloody hell. Fifth gear. 7,000. 8,000. It's pulling like a train. These McLarens, they are like a leaf in the wind when you've got your foot down. Okay, into the first corner. Brake pedal, there's a new brake booster. I have to say, McLaren's always been pretty divisive when it comes to brake feel, because they've got a bit of dead travel at the top and you have to get really stuck into it. I personally have always liked that. Some people like the really, really sharp early response that you get in some other supercars. But this McLaren, these McLarens, they've got a lovely progressive brake pedal that's easy to modulate. Right, already this car, you can just revel in the purity of it. Gets into corners so nicely. Front end bite coming out of the corkscrew. Oh, it's lovely. That's the thing about this car, it's just super easy to dial into. I can feel the tail just starting to rotate. Okay, I'm not sure there's another car out there that once you're into the brake pedal and have the nose sort of locked onto the line you want it to be on, gives you options in terms of rotating the car. Go. Steering, they've increased the speed of the rack a little bit. I think that's probably likely to be more noticeable on the road. It's not that obvious on track. The car just feels as accurate as the 720 always was. Just a fantastic bit of kit. Coming out of the corkscrew, key corner, there it goes. God, the power, it's so fast. Go deep into the corner, let it run wide. The car already wants to start rotating. You just balance it on the throttle. The V8, yeah, it's not the most precise thing. Never was, never will be, but actually you can work with it. You can learn its various quirks and characteristics. Whew. I'll tell you what, this car is so fast that it's difficult to present and actually really get into the experience. But about half an hour ago I had a set of laps without presenting, and it was just a gloriously engaging, intuitive machine. It's wild that a road car can feel this adjustable and easy to manipulate on Pirelli P0 Trofeo R tyres, but the 720S manages it. I'm going to talk a little bit more about spec now, because McLaren really has gone to town on this car, despite the fact that it looks fairly similar to the 720S. And then we're going to head out on road and see just how good it is. The aim here has been to optimise the 720S package while dialling in a bit more of the playfulness of the unhinged 765LT. The front track is wider to shift the balance of grip forward, and at the same time as softening up the front spring rate a touch, McLaren has also firmed up the rear of the car. It's perhaps why the 750S feels a little more alive at the limit. The shorter final drive from the 765LT also makes acceleration feel even more urgent, but it does peg top speed back a smidge, though only to 206 miles per hour. And of course there's McLaren's pathological weight saving programme. Carbon shell buckets are now standard and save 17.5 kilos per pair. However, the car you've just seen driven on track was fitted with the super lightweight seats first seen on the Senna, and those are even lighter. Each shell weighs just 3.5 kilos. Incredible. The Senna also donates its 6-piston monoblock front calipers, if you so wish, and the new standard 10-spoke alloys are the lightest ever fitted to a production McLaren. Even the spring and damper units are optimised and save 2 kilos all round. All said, in standard form the 750S comes in at just 1,389 kilos wet. That's about 30 kilos less than the 720S and about 200 kilos less than a Ferrari 296 GTB. For the Spider we're about to drive on the road, add 50 kilos, and 25 grand to the coupe's 245 grand asking price. Right, so we've had a go in the car on circuit this morning, and now we're going to have a go on the road. On track, this car, as the 720S was, predictably mind-blowing. But the thing about the 720S was that it was always just as impressive as a road car as it was on track. Now these roads in Portugal are actually pretty good, very good actually in places, but the ride quality of this thing is miraculous. There is no other supercar, for sure, probably sports car out there that rides with this filigree delicacy. It's absolutely lovely. You can tour in these cars, in these Super Series McLarens, simply because, okay, yeah, the engine can be a bit boomy, although in comfort it's really quite subdued, and you know, in some ways this car is always going to be a bit of an assault on the senses, but the ride quality, the seats are so comfortable and the ride quality is so good that all day driving is not a problem at all. Some of you will also have noticed that this is a different car to the one we had on track. That was a coupe, a blue one, and it had a couple of sort of track focused additions. It had the seats from the Senna and a roll cage and a couple of other things. This one's a Spider, and it's in a much more sort of comfort orientated spec. So you've got these comfort seats, these electric comfort seats, which are a no cost option. The Spider actually has a couple of really cool little features, including this photochromatic roof. So at the moment it's sort of quite tinted, there's a sort of blue tint up there to keep the sun out, but at the touch of a button you can sort of change it to being almost completely transparent, and it just gives the sort of atmos of the cabin something akin to being in a submarine. It really does feel amazing. And of course the carbon tub means you can have a low scuttle as well. The glass house is so expansive, it's just a wonderful place in which to sit as you sort of wend your way through the world. The other thing with the Spider, and it's always disappointing but you can't get this on the coupe, is that you can actually drop the rear screen into the firewall like this at the touch of a button, and it just lets in a bit more of the sort of the pneumatic turbo whooshes and histrionics, and you get a bit more valve train, and of course you can hear the you can hear and smell the environment you're driving through, and you don't have to have the roof off entirely. It's a really nice halfway house, and yeah, that in combination with the roof and the glass house just makes this probably the least claustrophobic and most sort of broadly relaxing and calming supercar environment anywhere. So I'll just close that window now because it does let in a surprising amount of noise. There's a few ergonomic changes in here. First of all, the mode dials. You've got one for powertrain, one for the chassis. So that's sort of the ESP and the damping response. Those have migrated from the transmission tunnel up onto the edges of the instrument binnacle, as you find in the Autocar. It's pretty handy. They're nice sort of high quality plastic rocker switches, and you can just go up through comfort and then into sport and ultimately to track. And one of the things McLaren have been quite adamant about with the 750S is that, you know, track mode isn't really for the road. It shouldn't really work on the road. They've tried to sort of increase the differences in feel and the personality of the car between comfort, sport and track. So you start off in comfort, and this thing's just so easy going. I mean, it starts with that visibility and the ride. It's just like a little magic carpet, really. You just guide it along, and you've got that unbelievably pure steering, which is still an electro-hydraulic setup when everyone else has gone to a purely electrically assisted steering rack. They've actually tinkered with the steering a little bit as well, which is quite a big call for McLaren, because the steering in the old 720S was really spot on. What they've done here is they've quickened the ratio just a little bit off center, and I don't know if it's a consequence of that, but the weight of the rack has also picked up a little bit, and you really notice it in slower speed corners. I'm not sure I'm in love with that. I always liked the 720S's incredible sort of delicacy, but feedback. That steering action didn't actually need to be any heavier. I mean, as it is, this thing still has quite beautiful steering response, and the way it changes direction, you sort of, it's a cliche, but you really think it through corners. It probably makes the 296 GTB, the Ferrari, feel just a little bit nervous and skittish, and it makes something like a Lamborghini Huracan feel completely synthetic. You are, of course, unlikely to spend too long in comfort mode, especially for the powertrain. I mean, in comfort, the V8, the twin-turbo V8, really is quite baggy and lethargic, which I suppose is the point, but it does sort of frustrate a little bit. So just on the rocker switch, up to sport, and the engine starts to just express itself a little bit more. There we go, the engine in sport mode. The engine really does start to pop and crackle a little bit on the overrun. I know that's puerile, but because this engine doesn't have a really soulful top end, it's sort of left relying a little bit on those kind of cheap tricks, and frankly, I don't begrudge it for that. It's quite exciting. I'll just drop the window again for you. You can hear a little bit more of it. I mean, at some point you are going to get the powertrain into track, sort of have a proper go at, ooh, there we go. That's the boost. You've really got to be dialed into this car. God, you can hear the wastegate. That's the thing. This car will, whatever you want to do, this car will go there with you. It's like, fantastic. You can see the air brake going about its business in the rear view mirror. It's got a lot of soul, this car. It's not necessarily the most romantic thing in superficial terms, but you know, it's a really high-tech and yet usable modern supercar with hypercar performance. I mean, when the 720 came out, it kind of rewrote the rulebook in terms of its breadth of ability, and you know, years later with the launch of the 750S, in a way they didn't really need to to change anything major. This thing still feels on another planet to a lot of stuff out there. And it still needs a more soulful engine, sure, but gosh, yeah. You have got to be on it if you want to uncork this thing, because it will unstick its rear tyres in an instant. And sure, there's plenty of electronics to help you out, but at some point, you know, they do start to get in the way a little bit, and you are going to want a bit more freedom. And just when that moment arrives, just make sure your brain's switched on, because underneath all the usability and the sort of the relaxing ambience and the remarkable drivability of the thing when you're just pootling, underneath it is a bit of a fire-breathing animal, frankly. Pretty easy to mistake this for a 720S at a glance. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Extremely striking car. At this end of the market, though, maybe people, you know, if you're going to debut a new name, essentially a new model, would people want more fireworks, more novelty? Possibly, but McLaren's in a tricky position because the 720S, given the tools that McLaren has to work with and the sort of philosophical boundaries it has to operate within, the 720S was pretty well optimized. It was a stunning achievement. It remains an unbelievably capable supercar, and one capable of rewarding in ways that other supercars just can't. The 750S just elevates everything a little bit. I mean, the UX improvements are welcome. Has this thing got, you know, Audi or Porsche levels of usability? No. And it doesn't even have Android Auto, to be honest, wired or wireless, although apparently that's coming. Is the interior quality improved? On the whole, this thing feels pretty well screwed together, and yet, you know, we had a curious rattle earlier. So, you know, on that evidence, McLaren's still playing catch up a little bit. But in this car, in dynamic terms, in terms of the driving, they've honed something that was already on a sensationally high level. And you can't really ask more of them than that.